Howdy, everybody. Humanities 4, Film Studies, Shasta College. How y'all doing? It's Wednesday. Um, I finished the Citizen Kane papers. Um, you're getting better. Still got to follow my instructions more. Too many of you are still writing the plot, and you're not analyzing what makes it the masterpiece it is. Whether you think it's a masterpiece or not doesn't matter. I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm asking you to look at the elements, the direction, the script, the camera, the performances, the themes, and try to put yourself in the time where the film came out. Citizen Kane would have been 1941. It's a long time ago, folks. You're in the movie theater. You just put your cigarette outside. You're inside. You're going to sit down on a rainy day and watch this film that the likes of no one had ever seen before. So try to put your 2022 glasses over there and look at it through the 1941 lens. Well, before fancy color films or superhero films, all that other stuff that's what we have now, and look at what is what with Citizen Kane. You don't have to think it's a masterpiece. It's all right. Thousands of critics do, but that's their opinion, and we're all welcome to your opinion. The point is, when you're writing these papers, try to take your prejudice about boring stories or long stories, or they're slow, or it's in black and white, and try to put yourself in the time that it was made. And then when you're writing about it, write about why is it culturally significant? What's going on in the culture at the time this film came out? We just came out of the Depression. A lot of you put that in there. We're just ramping up to World War II. A lot of you put that in there. Um, the country just came out of a horrible depression. We didn't want to go to war, and that was hanging over this film the whole time. Um, Remember, the culture is holding up a mirror to Hollywood, and they're looking at what's in the mirror, and the mirror reflects back on the culture. That's why we relate to the stories. If it was reflecting back on us and we couldn't see anything we recognized or hear anything we were familiar with, even it might be set in the future 2,000 years from now, we still understand the language. We still get the hairdos and the cool suits they get to wear. There's still something we can connect to. And also, human beings never change. As long as we're exactly who we are, except for possibly we all have cell phones, smartphones. So keep that in mind. I'm going to keep saying, please look at the instructions because I pretty much map it out in the instructions. And please do watch the movie. Yes, I hope you do research. And some of you do. That's great. That's awesome. But don't just do research. I could tell if you've watched the movie or not, because I want you guys to look at these movies, and analyze them with your own eyes, your own thoughts, and your own language, not copy and pasted from some internet source. Okay. I think we're getting better. But the further along we go, I'm going to sign another essay today. I think it's essay 7. Um, I'm going to grade tougher because you should get better. Meaning you should always have 3 pages at least. Please have more if you want. Should always usually have a reference page or a works cited page if you've got outside sources besides the movie. Um, that's those are the requirements. Look for the instructions in the assignment. I'm going to sign this other paper tomorrow, so you'll have another week to do it. I know a lot of you wait to the last minute, and it's hard to watch a movie and write a paper in one day. Especially, I'm giving you movies that aren't that easy to sit through with unless you concentrate deeply. So you get a whole week to do the movie. Take notes, look at it, and try to put your bias and your prejudice. Get out. Excuse me. Get out, you. Come on. Didn't work, did it, you little bastard? Sorry. Goodbye. Sorry about that interruption. My neighbor's cat constantly tries to get in here if I have that door open. And it's the neighbor's cat, not mine. Okay, so anyway, so today we're going to talk about, we're in the 60s now. Hope you saw the beginning of the 60s where we're talking about the French New Wave, which is coming into the 60s in France. And then last week I was talking about the British cinema of the kitchen sink dramas, the Angry Young Man movement of the British cinema, and that's the 60s. And today we're going to talk about more 60s, but we're not in Hollywood now. We're a long way from Hollywood. We're going to take a little side trip down the experimental film route. Yes, in the 60s, people were starting to make experimental films. This is way outside of Hollywood. There's going to be a little documentary. Watch it. It's on modules right now, actually. Try to sit through it, see if you can. And don't think as an experimental film as something the likes you've probably never seen before. Most of them don't have stories, they don't have a traditional narrative. Sometimes there's nothing traditional about them. That's why they're experiments. During this time, say from 63 to 66 or 7, amateur filmmakers could get their hands on 16 millimeter cameras and 8 millimeter cameras, the first time in the history of this country. And those are relatively cheap to buy film comparative to Hollywood film standards. And so people took the streets with these cameras and they made films that meant something to them. Most of them are what I would call pure cinema. A lot of them don't have acting or scripts, what I've been talking about this whole time, or professional. Nothing's professional about it. They're almost home movies in a way, but that's okay because that's where experiments start, is at the home. Now we all take films on our iPhones. There's no different. Except for now you stick it up on TikTok. There was no outlet for films in those days except for art schools and art galleries and people like Andy Warhol and Stan Brakhage and um, Jonas Malkus. They started these film societies in New York and elsewhere, so they could get their films shown, and they showed them in art galleries and in bars, wherever they could. See, people would watch these films, and some of them they're all worthwhile watching, but some of the Warhol films are extraordinarily tedious and boring. He has one film called Empire State where he shoots the Empire State Building in New York for an entire 24-hour cycle. The same camera angle aimed at the same building. And they used to show that in 2 or 3 different parts, and people at nightclubs, yes, they're getting hammered, they're taking drugs, it helps, and they're watching this stuff. He has one called Sleep. The guy is sleeping for 8 hours. This is all on YouTube. You can watch these things if you choose. Um, you want to watch somebody sleeping for 8 hours? It could be exciting, I guess. Well, that's what he was doing. That was his idea. He did the famous screen tests. The reason why they're famous, nothing interesting goes on except for everything goes on. Because he has celebrities, some people you probably don't know from the 60s and that era, actors and rock musicians like Velvet Underground and Jim Morrison. And then he has actors like Dennis Hopper, Peter Fonda, and they're staring into the camera. That's all they do. There's no story, there's nothing. They're called screen tests. But if you watch them, it really shows the time and place this was taking place, which was in the revolutionary era of the early 60s, middle 60s, when rock and roll and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were taking over and people were smoking a lot of pot and dropping LSD. And the older generation didn't understand the new generation. And these films captured that. And so the younger generation dug it, mostly because it was a pie in the face of the establishment. These films didn't make money. Warhol would screen them in movie theaters. People would come because of Warhol's name, but very few of these people ever made money off this. But they kept at it. People like Shirley Clark, who was one of the few females, she had her own money, a trust funder, and she made experimental films. And then she made some standard films. Her most famous one is probably called The Connection, based on a Beat Generation play about junkies waiting for their connection, filmed in glorious black and white. Yes, she does use professional actors. You can watch it on. You can watch excerpts on YouTube. Maybe I'll post those for you to look at the trailer, so you at least see what I'm talking about. Jonas Melikis had a whole film society. Came from here, from another country. He and his brother, and they were obsessed with filming street life in New York in the '60s. And then he put soundtracks to it or a narration to it. And he did this to archive and to get a record down of what life was like in New York City, Greenwich Village during this time. And sometimes it's the only footage left of what that time looks like. Everybody didn't have a camera or an iPhone in those days. Unless you had a real camera to go and film this stuff, nope, you just had to put it to memory. And so that's why this stuff's important. It was showing us who we are at the time, a generation of young filmmakers who were dissatisfied with straight Hollywood, and they were coming out and they wanted to bust out and do some different things. Um, like Kenneth Anger, his stuff is a little rough. You can watch it though. It would be rated X now. He was into lots of bondage things. Yes, mostly with male bondage, and some of it's pretty rough to look at. But there's always a point to it, and there's always an artistic side to it that makes it relevant and important, as the mirror being held up to what was going on in the underground culture of America. They called it the counterculture. And counterculture was huge. It was counter. It wasn't the culture. It wasn't my father's culture. It was the underground. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Okay. Anyway, so these films are important and they're still out there. On most of them are on YouTube. So watch that little documentary I posted, and then you're going to watch a uh, your assignment film is also posted. It's probably the greatest art experimental film ever made, called Persona by Ingmar Bergman, Swedish filmmaker, a work of highest genius. I've posted it tonight. I'll I'll post it in assignments probably tomorrow. You'll have a week to do it. Please watch it and try to enjoy it as you take notes. Just don't fast forward through it. I'll be able to tell if you've seen it or not. And I'm going to ask that question over and over again. Did you see the film? That's important. If you see it and you're analyzing all the elements I want you to, and you're completely, utterly missed the point of the movie, that's okay. That means at least you're thinking it through. You thought it through wrong, but at least you're thinking it on your own, why it matters. Persona is literally, some people, I'm one of them, think it's one of the greatest films ever made. But it took me a lot of years to see that point of view because I loved American films. And it was hard for me to see this different sensibility until I got older and more mature and wiser and smarter and more educated. You need all that to appreciate a film like Persona. If you're looking for a quick fix, a Spider-Man fix, X-Men fix, you will not find it in a movie like Persona. Stick with it, folks. and tell me if you're haunted by it. That gives you a little hint. And I'm sorry to say it's in French, it's in Swedish subtitles with beautiful women, Liv Ullmann and BB Anderson. It's just the two only really only. I mean, there's some other people in it, but it's mostly just them on an island. It's erotic. Yes, it has homoerotic aspects to it. It's got horror film aspects to it. It's got nightmarish aspects to it. You can write about all that. It's there, but you gotta go for the meaning. That's up to you. Next week, when I start reading the papers, I will have a whole lecture on what's behind that film. If you want to listen to it, if not, don't listen to it. Um, so experimental film, it never took over Hollywood or anything like that, but Hollywood paid attention. These new directors are starting to work. People like Francis Coppola, who directed The Godfathers and Apocalypse Now, Martin Scorsese, who did Mean Streets and Taxi Driver, and Brian De Palma. So many of them were watching these films in their film schools. They're going to film school where these films were playing. And so there's elements of these films, these experimental films, in their Hollywood narrative. They were taking aspects of that as well as aspects of Ingmar Bergman and the French New Wave and Italian neorealism, and it was filtrating into these films along with what was going on in the culture, the youth market, how television had wiped away the movie audience. Vietnam War was starting to percolate pretty big. Kennedy was murdered. Martin Luther King, not quite murdered, but getting there. Malcolm X, almost murdered. It's the decade of assassinations. There's upheaval. The youth didn't like the draft, and the old folks wanted them to go fight a war that nobody believed in, except for the old folks. That's all percolating under the surface, along with Jimi Hendrix and Cream and The Who and the Kinks and the Beatles and the Rolling Stone, the Beach Boys, all underneath the surface of this unbelievable decade of the 60s. That's all for now. Look for the paper tomorrow. Enjoy the films. See you down the road.